So welcome again, everyone, to the Frederick Hammersley Visiting Artists lecture for spring 2021. Our visiting artist this year is Paula Wilson. And I have just a brief intro before Paula gets into her talk and studio tour here. So the Frederick Hammersley Visiting Artists Program, this is the 5th year, started in 2017. And each spring, UNM Department of Art invites a prominent painter to the UNM campus and wider Albuquerque community to engage with both the public and our students as a way to honor and bring awareness to the life and work of the late Frederick Hammersley. This program acts as an extension of what Frederick Hammersley provided to Albuquerque and New Mexico during his years he lived and worked in the city. The presence of artists with painting-based practices of national and international reputation, which enriched the already vibrant cultural landscape of the region. This is all made possible by the generosity of the Frederick Hammersley Fund for the Arts at the Albuquerque Community Foundation. And the UNM Department of Art continues to be honored in its role in delivering this program to our local art community. When thinking about Frederick Hammersley and his work, the experience I'd return to most often is when I visited his home and studio on Carlisle Boulevard for the first time with some graduate students shortly after I had moved to Albuquerque. My students and I were given a tour by members of the Frederick Hammersley Foundation. I believe it was Kathleen Shields and Nancy Zastadil. Aside from the foundation's office that had been set up in one of the bedrooms, the house was largely as Hammersley had left it. His books on the shelves, some of his paintings and prints on the walls, and his easel set up in the modest quadrant of the house he used as his studio. It was a warm weaving of art and life, and at that moment, my previous preconceptions of this California modernist work had shifted. To see that these geometric abstractions and all their neo-Bauhausian pretense were crafted in setting fit for a hobbyist, let alone seen for the first time, the heart and the marks and the tenderness in the thumbnail after thumbnail in his sketchbooks was intensely moving. I realized that the things Hammersley made were much more profound and subtly strange than I could have imagined. They were bridges erected between art and life, between interiority and the larger world. I think of Paula Wilson's work in similar ways. Autobiography, self-portraiture, a holistic aestheticization of her environment, and a sort of cannibalization of past work root Wilson's art in the personal. Yet these elements frame and provoke conversations of consequence at a societal level. Also like Frederick Hammersley, Paula Wilson is making this happen from New Mexico. Paula Wilson was born in Chicago, Illinois, educated in St. Louis and New York, where she also lived for a time, but currently lives and works in Carrizozo, New Mexico, where she maintains a magical studio and other creative environments with her partner artist, Mike Lag. As an extension of her practice, Wilson, along with Lag, coordinate Momozozo, which organizes various art events within the community of Carrizozo, and also co-runs the Carrizozo Artist in Residency program with local artists Warren and Joan Makerson. Paula Wilson received an MFA from Columbia University in New York and a BFA from Washington University in St. Louis. Wilson's most recent solo exhibitions include Entangled at our own 516 Arts, Contemporary Art Museum here in Albuquerque in 2019, The Light Becomes You at Denny Demin Gallery in New York in 2018, Spread Wild Pleasures of the Yucca at Smack Melon in Brooklyn, New York in 2018, Floored at Williamson Knight, Portland, Oregon, 2018. 2018 was a very busy year. She has been included in 4 exhibitions at the Studio Museum in Harlem, exhibitions at Skidmore College, Inside Out Museum in Beijing, Postmasters Gallery in New York, Weatherspoon Art Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston, Zakata National Gallery of Art in Warsaw, Sycamore Jenkins and Company in New York, just to name a few. She has been featured in publications such as Hyperallergic, Art Forum, the New York Times, New York Observer, and the New Yorker. Wilson's artwork is in many prestigious collections, including the Studio Museum in Harlem, the New York Public Library, Yale University Saatchi Gallery, and the Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia. And just within the last few weeks, it was announced that Paula Wilson was awarded the Stone and DeGuire Contemporary Art Award at the Sam Fox School of Art at Washington University. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Paula.
Thank you so much, Scott. I love the way you talk about Frederick and these little thumbnail sketches. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. So here we are. Thank you so much to the Frederick Hammersley Foundation and to UNM for having me. I have had a marvelous time here. I've been here since February, and we're in the last days of my residency. And it's been particularly pleasurable to be in Frederick Hammersley's home, where I am right now. And there's this, he lived here from 1968 until his death in 2009. And not only did he live here, but he also painted here, as Scott was telling us. So in this back room right there was his painting studio. And then in the kind of dining room was where he framed his work. And while the house has been restored beautifully, there is still so much of Frederick here, including this cactus that I feel confident was living with Frederick when he was still here. And there's also this incredible mural that he painted in his bathroom. And I mean, sorry, this is in the kitchen. And it's like, really, this hard edge abstract artist made this, chose to live with this. I mean, there's so much more than meets the eye with this artist. Although this kind of treatment in the bathroom might be more in line with what we expect from this artist. I've really enjoyed taking baths in this space. And it reminds me of home. It reminds me of what I do down in Carrizozo, where my partner, Mike Lag, and I are constantly trying to kind of minimize the distance between art and life, and find every surface and every material to have a kind of homemade and present aesthetic. So Mike is a woodworker, so he made those chairs and the table and the cutlery and the spoons that we eat off of. This picture was taken by Angie Rizzo, and this is Ryan and their daughter Willow. And then I was able to break bread in this painted kitchen with Zyler Jane and M. Rooney. And Zyler was the 2019 Frederick Hammersley visiting artist. So even though here we are in the midst of this global pandemic, and when I walk around campus, it feels like a ghost town, I feel like this pretty empty bulletin board is a good reflection, or like an apt metaphor for my experience here. So even though we're in this space of like great absence, I've been super fortunate to be able to interact with some MFA students and to be sort of in this legacy of Frederick Hammersley. And I feel in this absence, this real ability to see like the infrastructure of interconnected endeavors of artists, and an awareness that as artists, sometimes we don't get to experience or see in a palpable way the effect that we have on others. And I just know that Frederick, could never have imagined that I would be sitting here in a global pandemic, teleconferencing with you all in his sunroom. And yet here we are. And so there's this kind of faith or belief or a sense of calm that's come over me by being able to interact with these MFA students, and then to see how what the artistic endeavor is may not be as clear to us, and how our legacies might not be as apparent to us, but they're real and powerful nonetheless. So on campus, I was fortunate to have a studio here at the UNM Art Annex, and I know that we would have liked to have done a studio tour or an open studios in person, but that's not possible. So I'm going to do my best to kind of fill you in on what I've been doing in the studio. So this is how the space was when I arrived, with my bags and canvases and paints, and also mirror. I find that it's really helpful to have a mirror in the studio to get like some distance on the work and to see the mirror image of what I'm working on. So it kind of like is a trick of the brain where at this moment I can look in the mirror and it's like I can see afresh or anew what it is that I'm working on. And so I'm going to play for you a couple videos that kind of span the studio that I've made somewhat recently. And so this is what the space is looking like now. And I didn't come into this residency with a clear objective or a body of work that I was expecting to execute. But I did come into the studio with a giant pile of what I call scraps. So the way in which I work, as Scott was kind of alluding to, is almost like a cannibalistic process where I work on muslin primarily that's painted and printed, but I'm heavily collaging and often cutting things up repeatedly. And so I build up this whole kind of history or almost like mounds of detritus from previous endeavors of art making. So I brought like a big pile of like 4-inch thick scraps with me into this studio. And a lot of these pieces of scraps have a heat sensitive glue that I have adhered to that's called Fusion 4000. Now that might sound like it's some advanced technology, but it's really just an iron that I use to collage those materials into the space or into pieces. And so each piece kind of these scrap materials has this like potential because it already has this glue adhered to it. So it's almost like it has this reciprocity or like ability to kind of be integrated very, very quickly and seamlessly. And so I'm going to show you some of these 360 views that Audrey took of the studio. And I felt as if this studio, yeah, these are wild, right? It's like this curved wall, like we're in the Guggenheim or something. And I felt like what I brought into the studio was almost like this container of the past. I mean, some of these scraps go back decades. And so what I would do is I would arrive in the studio and I would pull them out one by one and work back into them with oil paint. And it was as if I was trying to kind of like tease out some element that would make them come to life. And then they would just be strewn about the floor as if I was sort of trying to let these pieces free to see if they could find their place in the world or see if they could magically kind of find their mate or their companions and go forth from there. I took some of the smallest bits of scrap that I have and started to just build them up into what I almost see as like a Anthropocene of my own practice or something. Something about this feels like soil material or striations of earth that have been built up. And there's just all this history and all this information that could be teased out of these pieces. And then some of the works ended up sort of coalescing into paintings, with like air quotes, paintings. And oftentimes I'll put this sort of faux wood frame around the work. And it's as if like this framing device that's of my own making it kind of makes these pieces to me feel as if they're a little bit like self-aware, or they know that they're artwork and you know that they're artwork. And I'm not sure, you know, how this will exactly exist in the world. This painting might find its way in the background of another painting, like in an interior. I'm not quite sure yet, but I was happy with how some of these landscape scrap pieces were like coming together. This kind of feels like what New Mexico feels like to me, you know, these rolling hills and one vista after another, you know, as you travel forth. So this is how I made the wood faux frame that I was telling you about. And I was really grateful to get access to the New Mexico, to the print studio in the annex building. And thank you to the grad students for sharing that with me and for the people who got me access to that. And so I'll print this wood block and then adhere kind of dyed matte medium on top of it to get that kind of wood grain effect that I'm going for. And so this is an example of how pieces like this might manifest later in life. And I painted, in this instance, a faux shadow on the wall. So this piece is these pieces are super flush to the wall. And here's how they existed at 516 Arts. And then I just generate a lot of these scrap pieces. And so I built this kind of pyre painting came forth, which really reminds me of back home in Carrizozo. You know, I was saying Mike is like a woodworker, and so he has lots of scraps, and he's like an expert bonfire builder. And so it felt like there was some kind of like communication there with that piece that I finished while here. I also additioned this relief print, and you know, this print I actually made to be a matrix to cut up. So I wanted a kind of hair design that I could collage into other pieces. And I often find that I have to almost like trick myself into making art. If I like set out to make a relief print that I was going to edition, I would never have like ended up at this imagery. But there's something really exciting to me about the way in which I organized these like braids and locks, and that this can kind of exist on its own after the fact. But if I had set out to do that, I would never have arrived at this place. And here's just another kind of piece that's in process. You know, this is very much feels like the start of something. Here's another kind of freestanding painting that I brought that I've been working on here. Again, this feels like the beginning. And so it's like I arrived into the studio with all of these scraps from the past and even pieces, unfinished pieces from the past. And now I feel like I have all this material that I'm excited to like breathe out into the future. It kind of reminds me of like the way the lightning strikes like from both directions. I feel like I'm at this liminal space and excited to kind of see where a lot of these works take me. I was excited to make some progress on this piece in the studio. So that large woodblock figure silhouette that you see there, I made in 2006. It's the Baga headdress of the Nimba. And so this is a print that I had from years ago that then is now like kind of reappearing or making a new stand in this new age. And I learned a lot more about that headdress. But at the time when I made that woodblock, I knew nothing. It was completely a kind of act of ascertaining things that were of interest to me. And now it's kind of like folds into this whole new story. And then there's also elements here from rubbing that I did when I was at Yale for an artist in residency. of a Jerash Syria mosaic that I did, that I had these kind of scrap pieces. And so that these are all like coming together in this kind of multi-cultural cacophony of existence in this piece that to me seems like a wall that then is kind of letting go and opening up and kind of denying the solidity of existence. And I painted this choya, or am painting. It's still in process. I had to kind of like put my brushes down because oil paint, you have to allow it to dry. But I've really loved biking around Albuquerque and seeing all the plants kind of coming to life this spring, and painted this choya quite naturally. Like this, I wasn't looking at any source material, just really observing it with my waking eye when I'm out and about town. And I love the way the choya has this like gnarly rooted way in which it meets the ground, and then it kind of springs forth these fingers each time, and loved painting it like these fingers upon fingers, as if the choya was like growing as I was making it. And really particularly trying to get like this life in the shadow that it casts. And then these are some other pieces that are sort of in the works at the studio right now. And I'm excited to like see where these continue to go. Again, here are these scrap pieces that are sort of finding their way or finding their bedfellows. And I'm kind of thinking about them, or thinking about my work in some ways more kind of embracing a potentially didactic way of making or conveying information, you know, just thinking about moon cycles and thinking about how an artwork could literally be read, and embracing that kind of legacy. Maybe it reminds me of like medieval stained glass, a way that would tell stories, like biblical stories or something, or within pre-literate societies or illiterate societies. And thinking about what could happen in my work if I just really embraced the idea that this is something that contains specific information, particularly about culture or about plant life cycles. So these are some of the things that I've been kind of thinking about in the studio. So that was our little studio kind of tour. And now I'm going to take us way back. Okay, so this is Paula's early artwork, but no, I'm not going to take us that far back. I'm going to go to the year after I graduated from my MFA, because I really am feeling for these students who are embarking on this journey and finding themselves either at the end of the school year or at the end of their MFA, having completed their thesis. And I look back and I can remember how I felt when I was making this work after graduating grad school. And I remember thinking that I didn't know what my work was about, and that I didn't know how I fit into the contemporary art scene. And that gave me a lot of angst that I wish I could have freed myself from at that age. And now I look back and I see so much in a piece like this, Remodeled, which is a multi-dimensional print. And you have this figure who's looking at this vessel and these brontosauruses in the distance. And the fact that like all of this diversity of image can exist simultaneously is some kind of vibrating energy that I'm constantly kind of trying to get at my work. And I feel like I had arrived at it here, but didn't quite know that it was about the perception of viewing, and the fact that we, in our minds, puzzle through and make sense of an image is the thing that was super exciting to me, and is still when I look back at this piece. This is last summer, an etching and silkscreen. And I think a lot of my work has at its subject the act of looking. So in this piece, you have her, this figure painting, and there's this kind of light emanating from her attention. And then you have this figure in the background, and maybe there's like this frustrated spilt ink cage that separates her from the distance. And while the subject matter is the act of looking, I also feel like I try to reward good viewership. So if you take the time to kind of look in the tufts of grass there, you'll see, potentially some pleasurable elements that had been unaware of. And one thing I love about printmaking is that this kind of, you produce so much material with the multiple, and that it can be like remixed, and you can make new works that have new meaning from where you kind of launched off with the piece. So this is another important work for me, year out of graduate school. And here, this is Paula before she realized that like the scraps are the manna of my practice. And I was working on paper at this point, and I'm like constantly cutting up pieces in order to like get at something elemental, as if I could kind of crystallize my making, like that I could get at something that felt important or vibrant. But what I ended up doing was just having like a pile of scraps. And so again, I decided here to have this big piece of canvas, and I just started gluing these things down, and this figure like emerged. And I felt as if I could see myself in this figure, or that she had a kind of agency, or that she was in on her own making, that felt very exciting to me, and felt like a kind of way of thinking about art making that hadn't been, it's sort of difficult to talk about like an art having a being, or having a sense of life to it, but that's what I was gravitating towards here. Here's another piece from that period. So at the time, I'm living in New York City. I'm living in Bushwick, and I had a great time in New York, and loved being able to take in so much art. And yet at the same time, I felt this real pressure that in order to kind of like make it as an artist, I had to be out networking, and that being in the studio wasn't kind of like the primary site of success. And I wanted it to be, I wanted to switch that. And I also didn't feel like the way an artist existed in New York was the kind of artist that I wanted to be. It's like I wanted to be someone who had access to nature, someone who had kind of an expansive practice that could fold in things that were kind of not potentially sanctioned by the art world. And so my mom had moved to New Mexico, and when I was visiting her, I kind of kindled this romance with my partner now, and I moved to Carrizozo. So I wonder how many of you have been out to Carrizozo. It's a town of about 900 people, and sometimes people are like, "You're going to put Carrizozo on the map," And I'm like, "It's already on the map, but it's not on this map." There it is. Our town motto is "the crossroads of New Mexico," which is kind of funny. So it's an old railroad town, and the railroad runs through town but doesn't stop. It's near the Valley of Fire lava flow, and White Sands is right nearby. There's a wildfire raging in this area right now, but there's a lot of feeling of like potential in this place, and a really beautiful art community that has emerged there now. And it feels so deeply like home. And I love that I can leave my house on foot and kind of find myself fully in nature without any signs of humanity, maybe some barbed wire fences that one needs to cross. So this is the house where we live. And this is the house next door, which we purchased. and I painted this mural around the house. This is kind of now our guest house. And it's been really rewarding for me to feel as if my art can exist in multiple spaces within this zone. And I'm starting to feel as if I'm kind of constantly curating an art exhibition, as it were, as I go. And that really this space is the best space to view my work. And the kind of the primacy of like making art and shipping it off somewhere else starts to diminish here. And I'm really enjoying that process. And I make all my own clothes as another way to kind of bridge that gap between art and life, which really probably doesn't really exist, but you know, it's good to be reminded, or to kind of like carry my art with me wherever I go. Another thing in Carrizozo is that you know, you have to like kind of make the things that you want to have. So I've always wanted to have rugs in my house. So Mike and I started kind of like making our own rugs. They kind of started as like shipping tubes when we first made them. And now it feels like this really beautiful surface to work on. And again, this is another kind of instance where I don't think of this as a painting. I think of this as like a functional rug. And so the way in which I work shifts. Like this is probably as close to an abstract painting as I've ever gotten. And it's like anything is possible between tassels. It's like a different world. And the fact that I know I'll be walking on this kind of frees me up. You know, I find myself having to trick myself very often in my practice. So here you can see the structure of these. They're slats of wood that Mike and I kind of roll out and have a very like Zen repetitive practice of putting on the glue and adhering it to the canvas. And then I paint it afterwards. And I love this format because they can stand on their own. They can stand in a room slightly curved. They can lay flat on the ground, or they can be kind of fastened to the wall like a proper painting. So one part of my life, the way I've structured it is that I have lots of time and ability to travel and to say yes to residencies like this one, or abilities to go forth into the world. And I want to share with you a video that I made when I was at a residency in Miami. And this is Salty and Fresh from 2013, which I'll play for you now. And it's about 3 minutes long. about by imagining my own artwork, that large figurative piece, imagining my artwork, imagining its own creation myth, sort of imagining it having consciousness and being in, let's say, I was imagining it being in the Art Institute of Chicago, where I grew up going with my mom to look at art and loved the Impressionist wing. So I'm imagining my own artwork that's sort of like in this museum and looking out at like these picnicking scenes in the Impressionist wing, and maybe some Greek vases in the back. And there are a lot of asses in my work. I haven't really shown you too much, but you know, that kind of factors into it. And then that kind of act that we now all do when we're looking at paintings and holding up our phones and kind of like taking pictures, as if we can like kind of get at that that majesty and carry that artwork with us. And so, and kind of also, so giving an artwork a kind of agency, and also placing myself within a canon of art history that's like excluded people of color and women, and just finding, you know, my place in a sort of triumphant like self-insertion with grandeur, and owning that power of the artist itself, you know, rather than the primacy of the art object. Here's another piece that seems related to that, that interest. I really find the way in which we are with our phones fascinating, you know, and like this desire to capture the world in front of us, and how we become the things that we're looking at. So here's this figure who's kind of trying to take this picture of a sunflower, and yet maybe usually we're not able to kind of actually capture that thing that turned us so on by the thing we're trying to take a picture of. And so I imagined, like, what if it really did give you back that satisfaction? And so in this painting is a video screen, and I'll play you a little bit of the video. And I feel like that's an instance in which I was able to kind of tease out something erotic and sensual without having to default into the pornographic. And I kind of think of myself as like a ecosexual, somebody who really gets turned on by nature and is aware of all the sexuality that nature holds. And so I was really excited to kind of like have that video speak to that, that sort of sensual existence. So I want to talk to you a little bit about another video project of mine that I took place in 2016, when I was also in another artist in residence program with the Joan Mitchell Foundation. So again, another artist legacy that's like breathing life into future generations. And the Joan Mitchell Center is located here. And then at this spot is a Confederate monument base where the monument itself had been removed. So we would find ourselves traveling often past this Confederate monument on our way to the Museum of Art or to the park there that had these amazing live oak trees that were hundreds of years old. So here is this pedestal, and in conversation with my fellow peers at the residency, people were kind of talking about what should happen to this pedestal, or what should happen to the monuments itself, like where did it go, and what would be a good way to deal with this history. And some people felt like this was like a scar on the landscape. And I had a really impactful experience in New Orleans. It's a very, very special place, and went to the Backstreet Cultural Museum, which is dedicated to the legacy of Black arts. And it houses a lot of these Mardi Gras costumes, which are made incredible works of art that are made for like one day to be like worn once. And if it weren't for this museum, they actually wouldn't really have like a kind of public display. And also at the Backstreet Museum, it highlights the second line clubs, which are African-American clubs that were organized to help Blacks with many services like loans and funeral services, which they were being denied by the powers that be. And a part of these culture clubs is that they host these second lines, which are funeral parades. And so there's this idea of like death built into this amazing celebration. And I just felt such an affinity to that way of looking at life, that like, that a funeral is not a time to only mourn. It's also a time to dance and to be aware of our own existence. So there are people dancing on multiple roofs all through the second line, and I felt this kind of ancestral restoration, if that makes sense in this instance, and also a kind of an acceptance of sexual energy and of a kind of celebration of life, and like finding our people just in an afternoon. Here's my friend Rhonda and her cousin. We all got beads. And so back in the studio, I made this kind of like tunic suit without any real clear, plans or something, just kind of thinking more about costuming. But then the day before I was leaving, after being there a month, I decided that I wanted to engage that Confederate monument base. And I did a covert performance early in the morning, was there for about 20 minutes before a cop interceded. But I'm going to show you this video. On the left channel is found footage of the removal, and on the right is the covert performance. And it's only a minute long here. This is how the site is now, thanks to Google Maps. So you know, these hedges are lovely and all, but to me, this is erasure. This is like, this does nothing to the cause or to help engender conversation. And in a lot of ways, the monuments that still stand, you know, sort of are potential sites for protest, for organizing, for the ability to see the reality of this country and the horrors that built it and continue to be perpetrated against its own. And I just feel a kind of excitement for the awareness of these monuments, and from an artistic standpoint. And there seems to be a lot of organizing of exhibitions and artist projects around them. And I mean, I did this back in 2017, but it's exciting to feel like I'm a part of a larger trajectory that might not be art world sanctioned. You know, a lot of the artists that might be involved in this might not even call themselves artists. So I'm just going to take us back to Carrizozo to kind of start to wrap this up. About 6 years ago, Mike and I purchased these suites of buildings. You have the old Cibola Hotel, the Ford Garage. There was also a microbrewery for a spell, and then the Lyric Theater that started as the Crystal Opera House. And it's been such a blast to really invest in this place and to kind of be the stewards of these buildings. This is the way the Lyric was when we got it. And now we've opened it up and held lots of concerts and artist talks and the like. This is my studio space, which is 5,000 square feet. It's like a total dream as somebody who grew up in cities, you know, like living in closets and working in basement spaces. This is the hotel. Mike, this part was really like caving in. So Mike just like cut a hole in the roof and opened it up. It's like our little James Turrell sculpture or something. And as Scott was saying, we have our art organization Momozozo, which is open on Fridays from 12 to 1. So please stop on by if you ever find yourself in Carrizozo on Friday from 12 to 1. There we do different art activities. This is us having tumbleweed races, printing Carrizozo Blows t-shirts. Here we are with an AmeriCorps group. And one of our real mainstays is this kind of recycling game that we have here, glass recycling game. And you can pick yourself up a trophy. Here is some of our artists in residence having a conversation about collaboration that was sort of spawned from their zine, Intimate Disagreement is Life. So that gives way to our Artists in Residence program, which we founded with Joan and Warren Malkerson back in 2016, and have welcomed over 40 artists over the years. This is Adrienne Pigeon giving a lecture about UFOs and how we never think about the beings that perished in the crash, which is actually closer to Carrizozo than it is to Roswell. Simone Biles. Anyways, I won't tell you all about these artists, just to say that it's been really incredible having this program and bringing a diversity of conversations and artists to Carrizozo, and then also to see how the town itself has like embraced the program. And if our artists need anything, want to use like a clay shop, there are people in town who do that. And this is Ebony Rhodes, who is our kind of philosopher in residence. Yeah, and like sometimes people will be like, when is our next artist in residence coming? As if, you know, like they're a part of the program, they are. And that's been really beautiful to see. And it feels like a very unique part of the program is that the town is the site of the residency. And okay, so I'm kind of coming to the end here. I'm just going to show you, I want to show you this painting a little bit deeper because it was used as a promo, and it has a video as well that's embedded in it. It's so hard to get a feel for a work of art in pictures, and being here and interacting with the MFA students has really made me remember how true that is. But in this kind of cell phone is a monitor that's inset in there, and I'm gonna play for you that video. Sort of all about the, like here the figure is kind of like waiting to the inspiration to strike, and yet in the video again it's like this primal, expansive mark making practice. So when the pandemic hit, Mike and I were in Oberlin doing this print edition. And I'm going to show you some of the paintings that I've made last year. I'm kind of surprised by where I decided to kind of turn my attention to. It's almost as if I wanted to go deeper into the magical plane of the painting surface and all the life and intricacies and unseen motivating creators, co-creators, you know, kind of in the works here. And again, this sort of like active looking and lots of windows, which, you know, makes a lot of sense, even though I felt a very free mode of transport or ability to get around in Carrizozo compared to a lot of my friends in metropolitan areas. So here you can see like some of the relief print that I was telling you about earlier, that how that becomes integrated into, collaged into this painting. You can see like a screen that I printed in the background, and it almost feels like this painting has like a wildfire glow to it, and there was a fire kind of raging at this time, and like I was saying, there's Three Rivers fire is in the area right now, so it felt like it kind of spoke to that. This piece called Reflected, it's kind of a little still life happening here. And lastly, this painting from the ground up. She's kind of coming up from this mound of compost or clay, sort of that space in between solidity and transformation. Thank you. Thank you so much. If you are interested in the artist in residency, that's the website right there, carrizozoarts.com. We're not accepting residents this coming year because our applications, because we had to reschedule so many artists during the pandemic, but eventually it will be open up to all. So I'll stop screen share here. So I'd be happy to answer any questions in our remaining time. Priscilla, look at you with your, that is so cool. If Yeah, if anybody wants to raise hands, we can unmute or you can type in the chat.
So you are very busy and you live in a remote part of the state. How do you get around? How do you make all these commitments? And when do you fit in your practice?
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, so it's like 2.5 hour drive from here, from Albuquerque to Carrizozo. And yet that's like such a perfect, beautiful amount of time to be able to think and to be able to, you know, have a little space and time to myself. I mean, I think that there's so few distractions out there in Carrizozo, right? Like, I'm like, ooh, I want sushi. No, I can't go get sushi. Ooh, I want, go see a movie, anything. And so I also feel like my partner and I really we bolster each other in kind of like our schedule and going deep into the work and taking breaks. And so I'm in the studio every day, right? It's sort of a constant thing, but it does feel like this coming year, I didn't want to exit this pandemic with like all this obligations and all these things to do. So I've really cleared my schedule out and am more interested in like welcoming people to Carrizozo rather than like going forth, as it were. Okay, so somebody asked, do you ever make things just to use for scraps? Well, I feel like I kind of talked about that, right? Like that hair pattern I made to be scraps, or to be, to get collaged and cut up. So I do feel like I do that. Like I'm rarely like, here's my canvas stretched around a stretcher bar and I'm going to start building a piece. It rarely goes that way. I'm always like getting there by some side angle. I was wondering if she could talk a bit about the relationship of print to painting. Well, I feel like I fell in love with art making through printmaking. I'm dyslexic, and sometimes I like to think about it that like I've got a printmaking brain, or like my brain works in reversal and works that way. And I love the way the multiple can like generate all this material. But in a lot of ways, to me, there's not a clear delineation. It's like a very kind of fluid space. Like if I'm thinking about making a gradient of sky, I'm like, a rainbow roll is the way to go with that. And if I'm thinking about making clouds on top of that sky, I'm like, let's get some paint out and make that happen. So I feel like there's sometimes to where people like to make this definition or talk about how like printmaking isn't as like valued as painting, but to me that's like such a useless way of thinking about it. It's like it's all arising in the same material, and I do love having wood blocks that I've had for years, that can like come out and have a new life or keep giving. So at heart, I'm a printmaker for sure. Doing both the studio tour in this and then also talking about my work, I wasn't able to talk about this whole body of work that I've done around the yucca plant and its mutualistic relationship to the yucca moth. And so like, if you visit my website, you can check it out and stuff. Like you're definitely intuiting where my attention is. And there's bodies of work there that have, that are teasing this out, and like these large figures that have all these information, like one's the flower stage, one's the pod stage, one's the seed stage of the yucca. But just for time, I wasn't really able to get into it. But that is through that lens of the yucca and the yucca moth is really how I feel like I started to get at this New Mexico landscape and a sense of place. And again, a sense of agency with the communication with these miraculous plants and animals around us that feel super palpable in the desert. Have you always worked through experimentation or arrival? How did you determine / find peace in your process? I mean, it's a constant battle to find peace. That feels like a contradiction, but like, I feel like by being around other artists, I'm reminded of the, like we're all like struggling to figure this thing out. But I look at another artist and I'm like, oh my God, you don't have to struggle. You're already there. It's like, but then turn it on myself and I'm like, oh no, it's not enough, or it's not this. So I feel like the answer to your question is yes. I've always worked with experimentation. It's my process and I'm owning it now. Whereas when I was out of grad school, I was terrified by that insecurity. And now, as you know, like a little Alan Watts, I see the wisdom in that insecurity. How do you keep creative and inspirational? Any ideas to use to help you be so? I think that it can be helpful to have routine, which actually is another thing that seems like a little antithetical to like creativity, that you build routine. I think it's a total fallacy that like creativity is a spark and like it happens and it's not through hard work and repetition. So I find that I clear my table off every morning when I show up. I leave it a mess and I clear my studio, and then I write. I always write at least 3 lines, which can be like 3 words, but that kind of gets me out of my, it's like calling the creative spirit or something in that act of writing. I'm not a writer, but somehow that feel, because I'm such a visual person or something, it's like the writing is where I can see that this thing popped into my mind or something. And then that kind of like opens up a space and this clean desk to launch forth into a creative endeavor. So I kind of recommend that, like having, and also being in nature is the greatest of all inspirer, like, and to clear one's mind, like to not try to like force our way through, and then being around people who who generate the creative spirit in you, and getting rid of those people who do the opposite, and potentially even creating groups, community groups of like meeting to look at each other's work. And I've been doing that over Zoom with friends, and have been really grateful for that through the pandemic. Yeah. All right. Not a question per se, but how wonderful to see such an immersive practice across so many modalities and environments. I appreciate your comment about rewarding your viewer. Thank you. We drove to Carrizosa and Mike gave us a tour. An hour there is more than worth the drive. Rock on. Yeah, we love visitors. Do you have any grant funding for your work? I do. Like Scott was saying, I just received an award. I guess it's a little different than a grant. I'm not somebody who likes to spend a lot of time writing grant proposals and stuff. I find that to be, unless I feel like I have some sort of a good chance of doing it, I try to shy away from those kinds of things. I feel really fortunate right now to have been like invited to do things rather than having to apply to them. But you know, I did my share of that in the past, but I don't really, yeah, I'm not really much of a grant writer, but I'm happy to join forces with somebody who is, or, you know, like, and I really respect artists who have that as part of their way of understanding their work. It's just not quite me. Well, I feel like we've gone 12 minutes over our time. Oh, it's good to see you, Jean, Lisa, Sophia.